and especially in things like expert witness work. In litigation, lawyers will try hard to push the pen of an expert witness and say something like, could you use the words statistically significant? And like people who do significance tests in statistics know that that's a mushy term. Like it depends on the test you're using. It depends on the threshold you want to assign to the significance, the probability. But for a lawyer, it's a very useful bully word because then my expert says it's statistically significant.
The conversation with Mo Srivastava at the Roundtable Talk in Perth left me with many unanswered questions. Mo is just such an interesting guy to talk with. He's full of stories and experiences that I hope will not just humor me, but also inspire others that tune into this channel. So, unscripted again, we start off somewhere and soon touch on some of Mo's traveling stories and the tropes and philosophies associated with consulting, the challenging jobs he's worked on, and the concept of taking risk to develop your career. Then we talk statistically for a moment and delve into the tricky subject of translating statistical language and outcomes into simple language, something that I've been fascinated about for some time and finally felt I got some real answers here. Then I throw Mo one of Kahneman's phrases, which has been haunting me for some years now. And it goes like this: subjective experience is not a reliable indicator of judgment accuracy. So Mo goes into that and he talks about the wisdom of the master's fallacy. And we kick this around a fair bit to try and get to an answer. So listen to the end if you want to find out whether we actually came out of that rabbit hole. And now I bring you Mo Srivastava, unscripted, uncut. Enjoy.
Yeah, it's magical, some of the stuff we were able to get into because we work at times in the wilderness, in the genuine wilderness of this planet.
Yeah.
And it's a real privilege. It's kind of irreplaceable.
It is. And do you ever feel like if you're like at the back end of a trip, do you ever feel the need to spend another 5 days to do, the token tourist stuff? Or do you just, there's so much already packed into the trip itself.
Yeah, I've done that more in the past decade, and in the early years of being a consultant, I flew through Singapore 6 times, and know the airport, Changi Airport, and never really got to see Singapore.
Yeah,
and
right.
And then same with some of my trips to Australia. Like I was in Australia and I did courses, and but with time, as I grew older, I thought that's just stupid. Like you're in some of these amazing places, just tack some time on at the end or the beginning, and be a tourist.
Can you do that? Can you do it by yourself? Always, if describe sometimes going to a concert, right? I love live music, love going to concerts, but if you go to a concert by yourself, it's just not the same. Sharing it with somebody is. Yeah. So if I go on a trip, I kind of absorb what's around me and I appreciate it for what it is. Yeah. There's nothing better than reminiscing with somebody else about, that trip that you used to go on. And
Yeah, I'm interested to talk to my son about how he's found these last 2 weeks in New Zealand, because he's on his own. Yeah. And I'll ask him the same thing about, like, would you like to have had your friend Nick with you, your high school friend, or your girlfriend? There's more to talk about and debrief on. Yeah. But on this trip through Australia and New Zealand, for myself, I really liked being on my own.
Right.
And that was in part because after Perth, I was just visiting friends and colleagues and old classmates along the way. And if I'd had my girlfriend with me, it would have changed the dynamic of reminiscing and kidding around with young adults who were 3-year-olds when I last saw them. And so being by myself allowed me to just enjoy this other person, this old classmate of mine, or this guy that I worked with in Alaska, and just invest time into that personal relationship.
Did you make a bit of plan for this trip to do that? Did you have a list of people that you want to catch up with?
That came right after I agreed to give the Aussie Mem talk in early May. I thought, well, that's a heck of a long way to travel for just a few days of conference. And so I started looking up old friends and people I'd worked on projects with. And there's several old classmates from Stanford days. And so I just found out when everyone was available and if they were traveling and if they had family holiday plans, and pieced together this 5-week trip through Australia and New Zealand. And then one of my friends, Steve Begg in Adelaide, he was the first one to ask me, well, if you're going to be in Adelaide anyway for 3 days, what do you think about giving a talk at the university?
Okay.
And I said, well, the purpose of the trip is more social in my mind, but I don't mind giving a talk as long as it's one that I don't have to prepare.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Steve asked me for the list of titles that I could, that I already had ready to go on my laptop presentation. And when I replied to Steve's request, I inadvertently replied to the entire CC list that had organized this itinerary. We were trying to sort out, do I come to New Zealand in April and then go west and end up in Perth in early May? Or do I start in Perth and go east and drift into June? And so that required a lot of discussion with several people.
Yeah.
And so other people saw the chain, the discussions with Steve. And then I got a message from Phil in Sydney. He said, well, Steve's getting a talk. Why don't I?
Get rid of
yeah.
the talk? Yeah.
And so it's ended up being this speaking tour, 9 talks in 5 weeks, which is about 2 a week. And that leaves a lot of time for still doing the reminiscing and meeting the adult children.
Yeah. Must be tiring though as well, right? I mean, constantly socializing is actually quite, constantly talking to people.
Well, I guess because of my recent health history, the stroke and the recovery from the stroke, it's actually been very invigorating.
Okay.
I've loved this trip because it's like an exclamation point on my recovery.
Right.
I'll end up having traveled through 11 airports, 7 cities, 5 weeks, 9 talks. Yeah. And there are the usual hassles of travel. You walk all the way to the end of a concourse only to discover that they've changed the gate and it's now at a different terminal. And it's nice, given what I've been through, it's nice to know that I can do that again. I can just walk back along the concourse, and I've left myself enough time. I can find the next gate. And all the people that I was able to connect with on this trip, some of whom I haven't seen for 30 years. It was great. Nice to reconnect to people in a way other than emails.
Yeah, or teams and that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
because it's, I mean, incidentally, that was the idea about a conference as well, because particularly in this niche resource estimation stuff, there isn't a real platform when we come together, and I found that dynamic quite interesting at the conference. There's also people coming from different jurisdictions, different cultural backgrounds. Just throw them all in a room. It's quite interesting to see the feedback from that.
It was a great format. I like the panel discussions. There was something relaxed about the whole thing.
Yeah, right.
And we weren't rushing from parallel session to parallel session, missing half of a talk that we wanted to catch. And other conferences are just this crush of papers and question and answer periods that get compressed to a minute and 30 seconds because you've gone on too long. And there was something slower and more open and leisurely even.
Conversational really as well. And maybe, to the point of us sitting together, which I really appreciate, by the way, especially after, weeks of travel and a number of talks already. I never have any plan or agenda for these things to see where it wanders. And I find I get really nice topics out of that you weren't really planning on. I mean, again, the same with the roundtable chat. I wasn't expecting us to go where we went at all. So maybe, if you don't mind, I've got a few areas where I know we have a professional overlap and interest, and we can see where we wander, because one of the things that I've really taken an interest in is this is the psychology of the work that we do, right? And we kicked that around a little bit. You talk about the imposter syndrome, which, the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger thing, and I love to talk about that, although I don't want to get too repetitive, because I did talk about this on the channel a fair bit so far, but I know you've got some interesting thoughts on there. And then I sent you this paper by Kahneman and Klein, which I also referenced a few times on the channel as well. And again, not to go too deep into, but again, this is a place where I feel, if there's any experts that I talk to, you'd be a person that would have a pretty damn, good opinion on this. So something I want to poke you on as well. That
would be great.
Yeah.
In the last couple of talks in Auckland and Christchurch, we got into separate discussions, but similar discussions about the change in what one regards as the purpose of consulting.
Okay.
Over the span of your career, and definitely at the beginning of my career, and I talked about this with people like Mike Sterk. At the beginning of my career, I thought that my job was to listen to problems people were having, come up with a solution, implement that, do a proof of concept kind of study, build a block model, write a report, and then we're done. And over the years, over the decades of consulting, I've had the opportunity from time to time of visiting with some of those people that I consulted with 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and realizing that they just reverted to their old habits. Like even after I showed them that there's a better answer, there's a better way of doing this.
Why is that?
Well, that's the thing that fascinates me. Like in the past 15 years or so, I think more about my role as it definitely still includes providing technical expertise, but I now think of it as also including what I'll just generally call change management. And that's the psychology bit of it. You have to find middle-level management and senior management in the company. You have to find the field geos in Senegal or wherever they are that are going to be champions of this thing, like that are going to be so excited about this that they're going to spend weekend time and evening time just learning it and doing other little case studies by themselves. And if you don't have the champions, if you don't have the support of middle and upper management, really, what's the point? Like I can do something that's like a mini PhD thesis or a master's thesis on any mining problem someone wants to throw at me, but what's the point? Like you just paid for something that you're not using. And so I think much more these days about the psychology of why people get consultants in.
Yeah. I find that almost eerily matching my own experience, which is shorter than yours, but going through the years of setting up a consultancy and running into these problems and then coming back later, almost exactly like you describe it. And to the team I always talk about, it's a people problem. It's a people issue, not a people problem necessarily. But take reconciliation, for example. I mean, the philosophy is pretty simple. There is no PhDs required to explain the principle of trying to match what you predicted, what the outcome is. And you can talk about the fallacies and the issues and the problems with that, fine. But essentially, it is how people work together and how that is structured that makes it either work or doesn't work, or not work. So that's interesting. So how? Because I think I know what you mean by this, but if you then go to a site, to give you a hypothetical, and you're working through your block model as a consultant, or you get asked to come and help solve that problem that you talk about. But halfway through, you recognize that there's really just a little bit. There might be a person that's feeling uncomfortable in their role, and there might be a little bit of strife between these people that direct that person. And with your experience, having seen a few hundred sites and projects, actually you think, guys, it's not the drill core or the this or the accuracy or the block model or the estimation technique or whatever else it is. It's actually how comfortable are you to drive that with your client? Are you at a stage where your career say, look, I'm just going to tell you what I think and whether you like it or not, or are you just still going to do what you're asked to do and send them the bill? How do you find that balance when you go do this kind of work?
It depends a lot on the individuals. There's certainly are times when I just hunker down and stick to the scope, get the work done on time, and sign off. Just get over. But if I actually like the client and I like the people I'm working with, I will engage in the team building, the creating a sense of that this is going to be fun. What we're doing together is going to be fun. I remember when I was working in Anchorage in Alaska for British Petroleum, and I was working on the full field model for Prudhoe Bay, massive models in the mid-1990s. It really challenged a lot of software to just get the work done for 500 million cells, about 10 different properties you had to simulate, and you wanted 100 realizations. And it was a technically challenging problem in and of itself. The first day that I went in there was actually a Saturday, because I'd flown in the night before, and I'd asked, it was actually the guy Steve in Adelaide now, asked Steve if I could get into the office on Saturday, and he explained how that would work. And I got to the area where I was going to be working for about 3 weeks in their offices, and it was a mess. I'd been given this kind of little mini meeting area, just penned off by partitions. It wasn't a separate office, but it had become the dumping ground for map tubes and old coffee cups that still had coffee in them and cold coffee and computers that didn't work. And that was my office. And so I set about, on that Saturday, I set about just cleaning the whole place up and putting up a whiteboard where we could brainstorm. I actually found a vacuum cleaner and vacuum. So it's like I'm a highly paid consultant and I'm doing janitorial work. And I found that I could make out of push pins and wing clips, those fold over clips that we use, sheets of paper. You can make little map hangers. And so I hung up all the maps, I got them in order. And then on Monday, when people came in to start working, these were the geophysicists and the reservoir geologists that I was going to be working with, they came into this area, and there was quite a large meeting table, like you could have 8 people around it. And there was a little desk in the corner that was my desk where I put my computer. And they came into that area and they said, wow, like, look at this. Yeah. And they started to feel good about their project. Yeah. And that was conscious on my part. Like I wanted them to get away from just using this space as a dumping ground for stuff that they couldn't be bothered to figure out where it went. And I wanted them to feel that in these next 3 weeks, we're going to do a lot of interesting and fun things. We're going to do them together. We're going to be sitting around this table. We're going to be doing stuff on the whiteboard. Yeah. And we're just going to enjoy this. And I think that was as big a contribution as the full field model with its 500 million cells. To show to a group of people that you can do technical work and have fun doing it, that was useful.
Yeah, again, it's spooky as I listen to that, because a very similar situation coming into a mine in Zimbabwe that was all paperwork and disorganized, as you describe it. Here's your office, which is a wooden bench and maps everywhere, exactly as you describe it. And it was a model to be built and to be digitized and modernized and then reported on the JORC and all that sort of stuff. And it was fascinating that if you get there, you see this massive mess, and it's not necessarily about the people, but it is the state of the information on the drive, or what we work with as well, is directly going to impact the quality of what we do. So the philosophy of thinking there, and I remember thinking, this is too big for me, because it's a big mine, and there had to be a change management there in how people worked and worked together and organized their data, organized their thinking. So I end up convincing the CEO, it was not based at the mine, based overseas, to hire 2 geotechnicians, as they're called in Australia, who were 2 young girls who I flew over, and the first thing they did for 3 weeks was clean up the core yard, because I needed to access the core to see in the model what was real, what was not real, all that stuff. And I remember the mine manager, a local guy, came in, and he was furious, and he was just shouting at his whole team, like, why the hell am I flying over 2 people from Australia, 2 teenagers from Australia, to come and clean up your goddamn core yard, right? But exactly to your point, 4 weeks later, the core yard is immaculate. You can find every piece of core that you want, and you can feel this change of, there's a pride, right? And people suddenly think, hey, we're working in an organized, there's passion about organizing the data, and it just changes the way people think and work. And then it becomes fun, because the moment you see that spark in people lighting up, that you've ignited something, that makes it fun. So if you talk, you mentioned fun a few times. Have you got antennae now? Or when did you get antennae where you said, this is not going to be fun? You know, because you have a reasonable feeling for these things after a while. You think, okay, this might be worth the money or something, because at some point the bills have to be paid. But this is going to be fun because these people are just dicks, or they're just never going to listen, and I'm just going to deliver it, put a ribbon around it.
Yeah. There's been one project in my life where I knew I was going to be fired as the consultant, and so I resigned first.
That's the kid. Yeah.
And the gears just ground from the beginning. Like the president and CEO was just hard to deal with, very pompous and arrogant, and like you quickly get to the point of thinking, well, why did you hire me if you know everything about everything?
Yeah.
What am I doing here? And so I think I knew pretty early on that wasn't going to work.
Right.
And in that particular project, the president convened this meeting in San Francisco with all the different people contributing to the feasibility study, the metallurgists, the mining engineers, and the environmental people, and the geology resource people. And it was in early January, so, and because it was San Francisco, he started the meeting by having one of those touchy-feely moments about, tell us, everyone will go around the table and tell us what special thing happened over the Christmas season, and what vision and hope you have for the coming year.
Different.
And so I was sitting right beside him, and he hadn't yet decided which order we were going in.
Right.
And I said, I'll go first.
Oh, dear.
And I said, well, it was really special over Christmas. I realized that I can't give to this project what you need. And I said, and so my vision for this year is, I think I should resign. And you should find another
That would have been an
consultant.
interesting...
And so the wind went out of his sails, because he was intending on firing me in front of everyone. And like later on in the meeting, saying, well, Mohan, you're fired.
Yeah.
And like
American style.
Yeah. But I resigned first.
Yeah. Oh dear. Jeez. Yeah.
So sometimes, your spidey senses just tingle, and you think, I am not going to get on with this person.
Yeah.
And then there are other times when I'm challenged by someone, but the same spidey senses just say that this is going to be fun. This person really knows what they're talking about. I remember one of the Agnico projects in near Val d'Or, where I had been asked to go to the site on what was essentially a day trip. It was one of those, you might have to edit this out, but it's one of those stupid big corporate things that they do, where we flew on the corporate jet from Toronto to Val d'Or, and then we were flying back in the afternoon. Just avoided commercial flights. And when we got to the meeting room in Val d'Or, a bunch of the geologists and mining engineers, it was several producing mines in the area. We were there to look at a project that was not yet in production, but a lot of the engineers from the producing mines were there to help brainstorm about how to assess this new project. And one of the guys, as me and the vice president walked in, he said in French, but to all the people that could hear him around the table, he said in a low voice, which we could also hear, he said, oh, something, shape up, guys. The heavy heads are here.
Right.
Les têtes lourdes.
Mm-hmm.
And he may not have known that I speak French, or at least I hear French well enough.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And I said to him, why heavy heads?
Yeah.
And his name was Razar Emond. And Razar said, well, you guys just fly in and you fly out, and your heads are so heavy that they fall forward onto the conference table and you can't pick them up. Okay. You're like turtles who die in the sun.
Wow, that's pretty dark, man.
And he's then added something like, the last thing this project needs is another block model.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just out there with it.
Mm.
He thought, this is largely going to be a waste of my time, but I need to be here because the VP is coming into town with his consultant. Yeah. And so what I said to Razar was, I agree with you, and I've already told Mark, the VP, that the last thing this project needs is a block model. Mm-hmm. And so that set him back on his heels. He was thinking, well, if you're not going to build a block model, what are you going to do? But there was a baited hook there. We then got into a discussion about how we could do something different than all the block models that had gone before. This was a block caving operation. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't actually need a block model. There was no selectivity that was going to be done block by block. All we needed to assess was whether this entire potato-shaped volume would be profitable over the 2.5 years that it was being shattered and drawn down through its draw points. And it wouldn't really be till the end of the whole thing where you would finally know mm-hmm. if you had made money or not. So Razar listened to this alternative way of assessing things, and we got into a good discussion, and he was curious about the data collection we would have to do. We drove in these things called Alamac raises for sampling purposes. And he thought, well, that's smart. Like you're actually looking at the rock.
Can I jump in there? Because
sure.
I this hits home, because I actually don't like the term consultant. And I'll start with that, and I'll weave in a few other things that I was thinking about as you were talking there. But because it's such a, here's the problem, as you said all the way at the start, come in and fix it, right? Whereas most of the time, when you look at it, there's actually reasons for that problem. So it's not the block model necessarily. So if people say, okay, we want you to come in and do this, and you can already go, there's a bit of this, there's a bit of that, and a bit of that. I'm happy to build a block model, but how can we work together to see if there's anything we can do to prevent this from happening, and so on. And I think the whole concept of consultants in the industry, and this in the mining industry, I don't think it's as bad as, for instance, the financial industry or with all the Armani suits and all that corporate consulting that I don't think we suffer from as badly as some other industries. But there is still this conception that indeed, you come in. And what that then sometimes leads to, and that's where my antennae, my spidey senses are also a little bit sensitive, is this, they have to therefore manage the consultant, right? There are some project managers that think that you'll overcharge them, or that your timesheets must be, reviewed to minute details to point out that some blocks should or should not be charged. It's that whole trust issue, right, that we need to get right. And so yeah, and I kind of associate that with that label consultants, and it's the same with recruiters. It's a terrible term because it makes you sound so, so single focused, and you're just a headhunter looking at CVs and doing what you do, but there's a lot more to it, right?
You definitely see that in popular culture, like right. A lot of what Elon Musk has successfully demonized is all the consultants that are
right.
They're there in the government
with the acronyms, right?
And we got to get rid of them. And as a consultant, I think, well, maybe some of them are good.
Well, it's because it's not. I genuinely dislike the term consultant when I go to site and I get introduced as a consultant. That actually, first the imposter syndrome thing will come on and say, guys, I'm just trying to help and think along with you, and I might have some experience to bring from this side and that side, and a different way of thinking even that helps you come to the right conclusion yourself, right, without me actually doing any problem solving. I feel that is a far, and it's more fun for us to then do what we want to do as well, instead of just being shoehorned into this box called consultants, because the problem solving is actually what I find generally the most fun part of it. And I think the opening address for the conference 2 years ago, I made a point out of this. We literally get paid to solve puzzles. That's how I see it. And then with the human component, that makes it fun. But it's so hard if people don't let you do what, and that doesn't happen often anymore, to be honest. But
and I think one of the other things that happens most times that a consultant is called in is that the client has not been able to solve this problem themselves. They may have already tried with their own internal staff, and just can't get a good solution. And so by the time that people like you and me come in, there's already a culture of guilt and blame there. People are kind of embarrassed a bit that this problem has grown so big that now we got to get one of the heavy heads in here to help us solve this thing. And I realize that that's part of what I have to manage and deflect. I have to get people to feel that they're not getting blamed for anything here. That, like you said, that I'm here to help. And that we're going to enjoy the next few weeks.
You're still enjoying it?
Yeah. At the end of that Goldex work in Val-d'Or, they actually managed to get the mine built. The board of directors of Agnico agreed with this block cave probabilistic profit calculation that said there's a 95% chance you're going to make money in 2.5 years. And you won't know until then, but I'm pretty sure you're going to make money. And so the board of directors went ahead with it. And when they opened the Goldex mine, I was asked again to fly on the corporate jet from Toronto with the VP and a bunch of other people to a mine opening ceremony. And I thought it would be some kind of goofy ribbon cutting thing at the mill. or
pictures.
A big ribbon on a dump truck or something. And when we got there, they had thrown a party for the entire town of Val-d'Or.
Cool.
They had circus tents set up to feed 5,000 people, and kids had been let out of school. And it was
better make money then, I guess.
And they had little guided tours for the kids and their teachers, and neighbors were showing up, and the town of Val-d'Or was delighted that prosperity was coming back to their mining town, and it was one of those feel-good moments that we often don't get to experience in our business, because mining is often seen as a dirty and undesirable thing. But that day in Val-d'Or was marvelous because everyone was happy. And during that day, in this big circus tent where we're eating our lunch, Brozar Edmond comes up to me, pats me on the shoulder, and says, "Mo, I want you to meet my neighbors." And then he starts talking in French to his neighbors. He says, this is the guy who I told you about, like who right at the beginning said, we don't need any of these fancy block models, and there's a different way to do it. And And
Wow.
he wanted his neighbors to meet this guy who had come in, the same guy that he had insulted when he first met me. Like, it's one of the heavy heads coming in on the corporate
that's cool.
jet.
Yeah,
and
turn it around.
And that was a memorable and joyful moment, to know that, like, all the way to the colleagues, the client colleagues that I was working with, all the way to their neighbors who had no job in the mine. They were just people enjoying prosperity coming to town, that I had a hand in that.
Yeah.
And so as I drift on into my retirement years now, I do enjoy the work.
Nice.
I like the technical work. I like the clients. I like the thinking about psychology issues, like how do you bring people on site? I like the storytelling aspect. I love figuring out a narrative that works for people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot about this career that I've enjoyed that stays with me, and I'm not burned out.
No. I think I was just going to say, but it is definitely not a book here to write. That's just planting that seed there.
and there's lots of my peers from undergraduate days and graduate study days. There's a lot of my peers that are burnt out by late 50s, 60s. They just don't enjoy what they're doing anymore, and they're just paying off the mortgage, or getting their kids through university, and they're doing what they were trained to do as geophysicists or whatever. They're doing what they were trained to do because they need to pay their way through life.
So what's the difference then? Why can't they get there? Is there just a philosophical view of life that one needs to apply to get there, or is there like a hump you need? I mean, because everybody goes through their career. I mean, if I describe what I think, a reasonably general path is, maybe part my own. You start, you have no idea what good is, what bad is, what fun is, what not fun is, but you're out there, and after a few years you get a little bit of a feel for the playing field, and after a few years somebody will try to shoehorn you into a job that you probably don't really want to be. I mean, it could be a management job if you could, with Excel spreadsheets and with policing people, and then you need to try and get yourself out of there to do what you really like, because a lot of geologists want to be out there. But the best geologists, a lot of the good geologists, I should say, sit behind a desk. And you need to have a few lucky components in your life to be able to, get across that and actually develop something that you can really, truly enjoy. I mean, what you've done is a pretty rare pathway, I guess, to there.
I think it helps that there's a lot of interesting things to be done. Like, we do get out to the wilderness, the genuine wilderness, the places on this planet that people haven't gone before. And to me, that's a thrill. Like, the first time I was asked to make a site visit to a mine in South America on the spine of the Andes, I thought, I'm going, even though this is maybe not a project that I'm going to enjoy so much. I'm going just to be on the spine of the Andes, looking at the night sky, looking at the southern hemisphere stars for the first time in the spectacular detail from high in the Andes. And to me, that was like, it was just a side hobby interest in astronomy that made me think, wow, I'll actually get to see the southern hemisphere stars. And yeah, that's just an add-on to a site visit that I had signed up for. But there's a lot of those kinds of treats that keep the job interesting. Like going to old ghost towns in Nevada. The town of Goldfield is a genuine boarded up ghost town. And to see the old hotel in Goldfield in all of its boarded up glory. And you think, wow, this was
There's a few of those here in New Zealand as well. You can go and visit.
Yeah.
There's some good mining history here. But
yeah.
do people need to take risks to get to that sort of glorious fun space, right? That's kind of where I was trying to go to, because at some point you kind of get sucked into this groove, right, where everybody just becomes a cog in a wheel, some mining operation or part of a consultancy. Did you, maybe just turning a question, did you feel you had to take risks on some of those decisions where you had two opportunities and you chose the endless one because you thought that would be more fun instead of this thing that would pay for 12 months and it was a good corporate gig, etc., some version of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think of it so much as risk-taking. I haven't done a lot of explicit thinking about options and their risks. There's a philosophy about life that I've tried to impart to my kids, and that's that for those of us who are born into the West, we're born into a very privileged society, and almost all the decisions we face have positive outcomes. Like we're rarely presented with a black and white choice, like this option is good and this option is bad. We're actually faced with, well, here's a good one, here's another good one, here's maybe a differently good one, in a different way. And so what I try to encourage my kids to do, and what I try to do for myself, is whenever you come to a fork in the road and you decide to go down one path, just don't regret the path that you've chosen, because you can't go back. Time doesn't flow backwards.
Well, even if, sorry, this is like a completely different direction, but only quite recently I've really been sucked into the concept of free will, which is literally where this is going, right? Because if you would indeed go back in time, the conditions would be exactly the same, the state of your brain would be exactly the same, and you would choose that pathway 10 out of 10 times.
Right.
There's no regret that you need to have of having chosen the right or wrong pathway, because you would do the same every single time anyway.
And the point that I try and get across to my kids is that most of the regret that people feel is utterly pointless.
Yes.
And you could take the same emotional energy that's fueling that regret, and you could put that emotional energy into identifying the positive things that you are enjoying on this path that you have chosen.
Yeah.
Because every path is going to have something positive on it. And so your job as a human is to celebrate the good that is happening to you right now, and to not get into that trap of thinking, well, if I'd taken that other turn back there.
It's toxic.
It's very toxic and completely self-defeating.
Yes.
And I think I managed to sustain that philosophy in my consulting career.
Right.
That regardless of what I do, that something good happens. Right. And you have to remain kind of self-aware and perceptive and think, is there actually a way to interpret this? Like Razar Edmonds' comment when we got into the meeting room in Val d'Or. It was a negative comment, and I could have bristled and I could have think, what the heck am I doing here? This was a stupid trip. But to just move forward into it and accept it as a challenge, and to read his comment as something that's a catalyst for us doing really good work.
Yeah.
That's a choice that I make. And so you can choose to be happy, or you can choose to live with regret. And as much as possible, you should choose the former.
Yeah, well, I would push back on that phrasing though, but I hear what you're saying there, because that choice to be happy, to a lot of people that might sound, a little bit blunt, I guess, but some people just struggle with that just in you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
I know what you mean, but
and there is a risk of being a bit Pollyanna-ish about it, like just being blindly cheerful about things.
Yeah.
But I do think of it as a choice. You can choose with all the inputs you're getting, all the stimuli you're getting every day. You can choose to filter out the ones that are positive and to discard the ones that are negative.
Well, and even the because again, looking back on, I don't know, whether it's personal life or work life, work life, particularly the difficult times that we've gone through, either personally in my profession or as a company, have always meant some positive outcome years later, where I look back and it's like, well, that job sucked, but we would not be here today. And I wouldn't have the people that I'm working with today around me if that bad thing wouldn't have happened. But when you're in it, you get sucked into that negative spiral. But I'll change course for just a second, because I mean it's actually these softer parts, as I guess it's not the right word for it, but these social parts, these psychological parts that are deeply interesting to how we work, whether it's with clients or interact and so on, or enjoy the work that we do. Because saying we have fun or you must have fun when you do this work all sounds good, but if you're sitting there Friday night, 11 o'clock, running yet another model that crashes and so on, good luck to you having fun, right? So you can go a lot of different ways with that, but just one thing that you said, and it's quite left field, and I'm playing with the thought to either leave it completely out, but we'll see where we go with it. You mentioned some point it was 95% certain it was going to make money. And the question that I have for you is, how do you translate probabilistic outcomes of the work that you do into language in a report? Because somebody will want an executive summary, and the people at the top are not going to show them the histograms and the stats talk, right? And they're going to say the words to people, and the snippets that will end up in the news are the words that you use. And I refer to that as the adjective game, right? There are a certain number of words that we use, and the parallel to this discussion is, for instance, all the market announcements that talk about everybody has the best of the best, clearly, but when you actually look at the stats, then naturally, only that part of it is really, truly the best. And the examples here are drill hole spacing studies, right? So just technically for a minute, right? But also, how certain are you that this mine is going to, quote unquote, make money? You can give them the probabilistic stuff, but you have to choose words. Are you conscious of that choice of words, and do you ponder on that specifically, and do you have a system for translating that, or do you just let the pen do the work when you ultimately write the words on paper?
I have a template, a way of doing that, and it ties into the cultural familiarity that people have with two phrases that virtually everyone hears at some point in their young adult life. One is beyond a reasonable doubt, and the other one is on the balance of probabilities. And they come out of the justice system. And so in criminal cases, a jury or a judge has to decide beyond a reasonable doubt that the prosecution has proved its case. And in civil cases, it's on the balance of probabilities. And so there was a statistician, that was one of the first great statisticians, Sir Robert Fisher, actually tackled that as a statistical question. And what does it mean to say beyond a reasonable doubt? And he was the one that came up with the 95% probability. And people often wonder, why are we at 95? Why weren't we at 90 or 98 or 99 or 75? It's all kinds of numbers we could have chosen. And the answer is Robert Fisher chose 95.
Well, that's funny. Sorry to interrupt, because I usually joke on this channel when I do my little technical talk. If I ever see the 1 in 20 guy on the street, I'll punch his lights out. So it's Fisher that I have
Fisher.
to. Yeah, right.
It's Fisher who just decreed, because he was Sir Robert Fisher.
It's convention, right?
Decreed that this is what we should numerically define as beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
And then on the balance of probability, that's probably more intuitively obvious as like a 50-50 chance. It's more likely than not. And that's the burden of proof in a civil case. And so when I'm talking to boards of directors or the non-technical people in a mining company, like the one with the project in Val d'Or, and I'm trying to get them to understand this 95% probability calculation. Sometimes I'll tell them about Robert Fisher and try and connect them to 100 years ago when he was formulating this. Sometimes I'll just jump straight to the difference between beyond a reasonable doubt and on the balance of probabilities, because those are words that people have an affinity for or familiarity with, even if they don't exactly understand what it means. They know that one is a more extreme form of proof that you're asking for than the other one. And so just to use those as 2 points of reference for on the balance of probability, like a 50-50 chance that we're going to do better or do worse here. And then there's this other thing beyond a reasonable doubt that's clearly up somewhere closer to 100%.
Why don't we more explicitly call that out in the fabric of our reporting? Because I don't recall any write-ups here that make that clear. And for instance, that on the balance of doubt, that is effectively built into the JOR code, for instance, because more likely than not, when we talk about RPEEE, for instance, it's supposed to be more likely, than not, which is 50%, which is exactly what you're talking about. But then when we assess anything from block models to duplicates to bias between CRMs and all the rest of it, it just turns into a waffle. Right, it turns into just chaos on a piece of paper. So why have we lost the source of all of that? Is there, because the Fisher test is something that is quite well or simple, a basic test, but you put that in a report, and it's not necessarily clear to the audience what that means, And even when you look at the regulatory regime, which I know you have your opinions on as well, the word reasonable comes into play because, by law, a reasonable person is a defined term, right? So there has to be a reasonable basis to any statement that you put out there when it comes to resource estimates and so on. Why do we struggle with that so much? And is there a linkage to be made between that fundamental statistical background and the language that we use? Because I can't just think at the top of my head of a simple document or a source that you can point to explain that. The way you just explained it is brilliant, so I think that's a great start. Is there?
I think there's a tension between common parlance and statistical parlance. We know how to calculate probabilities and get a number out of a computer that says there's an X% chance of something happening. The rest of society has the ability to express their confidence or their lack of confidence in something using something that sounds quantitative but really isn't. And so I've noticed a lot in the mining industry that there are kind of like about 2 or 3 threshold numbers that are used to indicate whether someone is really confident in this estimate, not so confident, or completely uncertain.
Right.
And so someone will say, like, if I ask someone, how sure are you about that? Like you've calculated the life of mine, like how sure are you that the mine will last that long? And if they want to convey to me that they're really quite sure, they think they've taken a very close look at it and they've sharpened their pencil and they're going to stand behind that number, they will say something like, oh, it's within plus or minus 5%. 5 didn't come from anywhere except their mouth.
Yes.
And they don't, for some reason they feel uncomfortable saying, oh, I'm really sure about that.
Yeah.
They would rather say plus or minus 5% because it sounds more technical. And then if they want to convey that maybe there's a bit of doubt on this, they're kind of in that indicated range, they'll say something like plus or minus 20%. And if they want to convey that they actually know nothing, and they know that they know nothing, they'll say plus or minus 100%. But in fact, in the calculations we do, you can actually be worse than plus or minus 100%. Yeah. That's not the worst that it can be. But in common parlance, plus or minus 100% means I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And then 20 or 25, whatever that middle number is, or maybe 50. Some people would use 50, plus or minus 50%. And then a little number like 5 or 10. We hijack the language of numbers to avoid having to use adjectives to describe how confident we are. Yeah. And the numbers don't mean anything when they are just substituting for adjectives. And when we as geostatisticians and resource estimators have an actual technical framework for generating numerical calculations, we're running straight into that other way of doing it. And when we say plus or minus 62%, it doesn't really fit together with what a lot of people, maybe more than us resource estimators, if you count up all the resource estimators in the world, I don't think there's as many resource estimators as there are people who are making blind numerical statements about probability and confidence. And so I've often struggled with that. Like what should we do?
Yeah.
Should we just insist on our numbers and say, well, my number's better than your number? Yeah. Or should we adapt somehow to the conventions that people are familiar with?
But it's inevitable, right? Because, I hear what you're saying, but you have resource classifications where we are classifying something with words, which is intended to be a quantitative game all the way throughout. And then right at the end, there's a master wizard level 9 who says, and there it shall be, right? And we do assign then through the back door, if we apply, Harry's philosophies about how these ranges should work on a quarterly and a yearly basis, or whoever you want to quote there, then we go and quote some quantitative range on something that effectively is just a qualitative subjective range by a master wizard. So we've got all this quantitative stuff here, which all your probabilistic modeling to your heart's desire, a little. And there's different ways to classify. Obviously, you can do some really high-level approach that still quantifies it. But 99 out of 100 times, what you're looking at is just on Friday afternoon when the model needs to be classified before it goes out the door, some version of that. How can we get away from that? Oversimplification of quantification to adjective games. Because I acknowledge the problem, and I also don't have answers. We try to just be honest in the words that we write. Said, look, this is just what's coming next. Is a bunch of words to try and capture the probability in English language to the best of our ability, because we can't really, with the work that we've done, put a quantitative range on that actually really truly means something, right? That is still a conundrum that I don't see a way out of that.
No, I don't either. And at times we're guilty, our community is guilty of playing the game in the opposite direction, like with all of the terms we use for resources and reserves and their classification, measured, indicated, inferred, proven, and probable, resources and reserves. All of those are words that have meaning in English. Just yesterday, I was reviewing a proposal that we're writing for some advocacy group in Canada that wants to advocate on behalf of First Nations people in the Ring of Fire project. And it was clear from the questions that came to us in email that they didn't understand our language for proven and possible and resource and reserve. And so in our response to their request for a proposal, I had my coworker, Alan, include a couple of paragraphs that say, here's how in our profession we use those words. And we understand that in broader English usage, those same words are used and they have different meanings. And so at the same time that people in broader society are using numbers to substitute for words that sound too sloppy or mushy to them, we in our discipline use adjectives like indicated and measured when we could have used numbers.
Exactly.
And so we're encouraging confusion there or misunderstandings because we could have done it a different way. We could have called the confidence category something like level 1, level 2, level 3.
Yeah.
And then there could have been a definition of what those are. And there are things that come close to that, like the American Society of Costing Engineers has a nice table that I often use in my reports that says this is a level 1 cost estimate, this is a level 2, this is a level 3. And in their table, they have a description of level 1 is like a preliminary thing when you haven't really done much assessment at all. And then whatever level 4 or 5 is like when you're ready to commit to this project, you're going to build the bridge or you're going to launch the rocket ship. You know, you're pressing go now, and you need a higher level of precision. And so I sometimes use that ASCE table because I'm aware that if I just keep on insisting on indicated, inferred, and measured as the labels for things, that some of the lay people reading my report are not going to remember the little bit of explanation that I had way back in the introduction. Like their brains are just acculturated to looser definitions of those terms. And so when they're reading them later, they risk misunderstanding what I'm saying. And so I don't know what the answer is. Like do we ask broader society to not use numbers incorrectly as numbers as substitutes for adjectives? And are we, who are we to get up on our high horse when we're doing the same in reverse? We're substituting adjectives for categories that we want to be important or to recognize as distinct categories.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one because I have felt a lot of these situations, not necessarily only the resource estimation side, wanting to approach this from a the most scientific possible pathway possible, right? So even when it's talking about, you talk about EDA on this trip, I think, exploratory data analysis or exploration data and so on, which is a space that I quite enjoy. And you have a number of instances where a decision or a recommendation needs to be made on the performance of standards, duplicates, that sort of stuff. And you can try all you like to remain quantitative and statistical in that assessment. But at some point, somebody's going to have to write some words on a piece of paper that says, this way or that way. And you can get very far with the quantification. And that's maybe a discussion that we have after this in the boardroom, because this could go on for an hour easily. But yeah, I do find it very difficult right at the end to not get into the words again in the adjective game. It's very challenging.
No,
it's interesting. But
I think it's an unavoidable bit of it, and especially in things like expert witness work.
Right.
In litigation, lawyers will try hard to push the pen of an expert witness and say something like, could you use the words statistically significant?
Mm-hmm.
And like people who do significance tests in statistics know that that's a mushy term. Like it depends on the test you're using. It depends on the threshold you want to assign to the significance, the probability. But for a lawyer, it's a very useful bully word.
Absolutely.
Because then my expert says it's statistically significant.
So sorry, because now that you've opened that Pandora's box, I've been involved with a few of those as well, particularly with that exact problem, right? And this is, so without obviously going into the detail of some of these cases, but it is some version of exploration potential, right? Something Group A has said, there's a joint venture, Group A has said you must achieve this, and some milestone that is pre-resource, right? So it's even fuzzier to say anything about with any quantitative statement. And then that threshold is met and Group B says, well, that's not even remotely what we thought you would do, and then some conflict occurs and some statement has to be made. And indeed, you get stuck into exactly that, because you can do statistical significance, but you only have to collect 100,000 data points to still show that at an alpha of 5%, the difference is statistically significant. So those tests themselves are flawed, and I always point to a nice article in Nature that pointed this out a long time ago, to the fallacy of the statistical t-test. But so you use it when you need it, even though you secretly know there's some problems with it as well, just so you can roll out that term statistically significant, right? And it's a very tricky term that lawyers would die on that hill. They go to war on that.
And there are times outside of litigation and expert witness work where I'm aware that someone that has been opposing what I have been trying to say to a group of people, that person will back down if I play the trump card of statistical significance, and they know I'm a better statistician than them, and they won't contest the word statistical significance because they don't understand enough about it. And so I sometimes use it as a bully pulpit. But I hope that it's in furtherance of progress on a project. It's attending to those psychology issues that we talked about before. I'm trying to get change to take root here, and I need you to just shut up for a moment.
If you feel party A is right and this is what's required to get that moving in that space, then I'll use that.
There's other times in my consulting work that I'm aware that I'm purely a mouthpiece for other people's views. Like when I go to Cuba, work on the Eastern nickel projects there. When I fly in, we fly and then drive for about 3 hours. But when I get into the guest house on the Sunday night, the geologists will come and visit and just be sociable. meet me at the guest house. And then we'll get into a discussion about what they've been doing for the last 3 months while I've been in Toronto. They've been slaving away in the mine, trying to sort out problems on the ground. And they'll tell me what they've figured out. And I realized quite early on when I started that work, back in 2006, I realized that what's going on here is they work in a culture where they can't speak up. It's a communist system,
Okay.
and they speak up at their own peril. Because if they're wrong, if they say something like, we should try this, we should try reverse circulation drilling, and if they're wrong, that's going to blow back on them. And they might lose their housing, they might lose their job,
Sure, yeah.
they might go to jail. Like that actually happens still in Cuba.
Yeah, wow.
Over technical issues. And so the reason they're telling me is there's going to be a meeting on the Monday, and what they want me to do when a certain issue comes up, like type of drilling, they want me to put a thoughtful look on my face and say, you know, have you tried reverse circulation drilling?
Yeah.
All I'm doing is I'm passing on a recommendation that I got from the geologist who I trust and I know to be really good at their work, and they've given me their reasons and I understand them.
If it goes wrong, then it's not their job.
But I'm standing in front of them. I'm the consultant from Canada. My house isn't at risk. My job's not at risk. I'm not going to jail.
Right, yeah.
And so I can be the one who stands up and says, yeah, let's try this.
Yeah.
And then everyone will write it in their notepads and, yeah, we'll try that. But it came from one of the Cuban geologists.
Yeah.
And that, I know that's one of the things that I'm being paid to do, is be a messenger, and sometimes a messenger of bad news. The geologist might tell me the night before, they've already done the reconciliation studies and
They already know
they're already know it's minus 10%.
Yeah.
And in Cuba, that's just horrible.
Yeah, but it happens everywhere. I mean, if that would happen, I mean, reconciliation is so siloed that nobody wants to be the bearer of that bad news and draw the attention to. And then a consultant could indeed say, yeah, look, you're right, you got a 10%, and then at least you've done the work. And it's, okay, guys, now how do we go and clean it up? It could be a positive. Yeah. What do you feel about the statement? And I've been guilty of sort of a number of years ago going too heavily on the statistical significance, only to come out on the other end thinking, yeah, that wasn't it. So these days I just say statistical significance is not materiality. It's not necessarily mean, statistical significance doesn't necessarily mean it's material.
Right.
Would you feel that a true statement, or would you?
Yeah. I have a bit of a parrot phrase on that, because I've been through it with many boards of directors. In Canada, the regulators say, and I parrot this, materiality is a determination of the issuer. And so the regulators say it's like up to you guys to decide what's material. And you guys meaning kind of like the board of directors, because they have legal responsibility for the direction of the company. And that doesn't really explain to you how to determine materiality, but it does say clearly that it's your job to figure that out. Now, the regulators sometimes cheat on that.
Yes, they do.
After they say materiality is a determination of the issuer,
They'll
sometimes
point out to
they
you.
say, oh, that's material.
Yes.
And they'll play trump card on you. And in Canada, the most frequent reason that the regulators play trump card is that some parameter, usually a cost parameter like CapEx, has changed by 100%. Like it's doubled, or the resources have changed by 100%. And so there's this like doubling rule that says, well, if you're off by a factor of 2 on your tons or your grade or your capex or something, that's got to be material.
Well, yeah.
And there's a common sense-ishness about that. And so when I'm talking to boards of directors and we're having this public disclosure discussion and what's material and what's not, I give them a 4-part checklist for determining materiality. The first one is the 100% change. Like the regulators are going to play gotcha on that. So just think about, is there 100% change? And there's nothing statistical about that. It's just a number that's easy to hang your hat on, like a factor of 2. Somehow in our gut feels like, yeah, that's got to be important. And why not 1.7 or pi? Or
you gotta. You gotta stay true to the system, right? And because the same discussion is happening here, right? Materiality is the most often misinterpreted, misunderstood concept about the codes and the application of it. And our regulators here very pointedly do not make those judgments by and large, right? So it is just compliance that they focus on. So if you say that this resource that is inferred is based on 2 drill holes, if you would go that way, inferred resources, that's your opinion, right? And if the regulators start commenting on that, it gets a very slippery slope, as you well pointed out on a few public statements that you made a number of years ago. Rants, yeah, no, I have a few of those, so you're in good company here. But so I feel regulators have to stay true to that. Otherwise, and because obviously you can say a factor 2 is obviously material, but who's to judge, right? Because as you pointed out, and I'm paraphrasing here because I didn't actually revisit this recently about this issue with duplicates at some point, right? Who are you to be able to say that I don't have the experience to say that's material or judge that technical aspect in my qualifications as a qualified person, right? That is not for you to judge. I've had my run-ins with the Canadian regulators, and the issue that I always roll out is this challenge that I got. I didn't put enough duplicates into my soil sampling program. It wasn't 1 in 20. It was lower than that. It's like, folks, when this is beyond the pale in terms of. So because they say, it's not enough to meet some sort of checkbox. I feel regulators should stay in that lane and not judge the technical aspects of that. But that opens a whole Pandora's box again about who then should be doing that qualification review of the work that you've done. And do you really think that good can come from that to allow people to make these assessments of factor 2s when it comes to materiality? Or to make any claim about the qualified persons?
Well, what I have suggested to several different boards of directors who've asked the same question, what I've suggested to them is that they take the bull by the horns and seize this statement that materiality is a determination of the issuer. And that the way they can do that is they can send to the Ontario Securities Commission a note signed by their lawyers or signed by the CEO or signed by the head of the Resources Committee or something, signed by someone that says, here is how we are determining materiality because it's our determination. And that immediately blunts the pick of any regulator who wants to say, well, you didn't do it right. Because now the regulators are on the back foot because they've got a letter of legal significance from the company, from the issuer, that says, here's how we're doing it. And if the regulators don't respond to that and say, oh, well, that's wrong, then there's kind of a tacit consent. And so the regulators are really disabled from coming back later on some, project in the future and saying, oh, that we deem that to be material. And so the 4-part thing that I suggest to people is the 100% rule, because that's the one the regulators like to use. And I think they're happy when they see that as item number 1 in the list. 100% change on an important parameter. That'll count as material. Second one is that the company is bragging about it in its promotional materials. And if the company is bragging about it, they're making it material. That they're saying.
Yep, we used to.
They're saying to an investor, think about this. Think about
give us your money based on this.
Yeah.
Therefore, material. Simple. Yeah.
Exactly. And so if they're using it for promotional purposes, they're making the centerpiece of their promotion, the PDAC booth, whatever, then it's material.
Yeah.
The third one is, does anyone at an annual general meeting ask a question about this? Like a shareholder. Does a shareholder say, tell me about the CapEx for the project? That reflects the fact that even if you're not using it for promotion, some shareholder really wants to know about this and actually asked a question in public at an annual general meeting. Like their belly's on fire about this thing. So they want to know, and that makes it material. And then the last one is, are you spending money on this? Like regardless of whether you're using it for promotion or whether anyone's asking you questions about it, are you spending a lot of money on this? And that clearly is calibrated by the size of the company. But if you're spending $20 million on a bulk sampling program, I would guess that the results of that bulk sampling program are material, regardless of whether anyone asks or not. And so I suggest to companies that they formalize that they have a discussion in the board of directors or on the committee that's responsible for that. And then they actually send this letter to the Securities Commission with the help of their lawyers. And I think that takes the wind out of the sails of regulators. And any one of those 4 is not a statistical consideration. And that's why it was that's why it was easy to answer your question when you said, is statistically significant the same as material? No, like none of those 4 questions are statistical questions. They're just common sense. They're getting at, is this important to someone? It's either important because they're spending money, or because they're using it for promotion.
That's a really neat list.
I've used it with several clients. The sticking point that I've always got to is the lawyers don't want to send a letter because they say that's not required. Like we're putting a stick in a hornet's nest here. Like we're going to trigger something. And so I try and get the lawyers to think about, well, what are you triggering? Like, what's the worst that can happen here? The worst that can happen is they'll have some advice for you on other things you should include. But you'll still have moved the discussion forward. And I find lawyers hopelessly risk averse when it comes to, what the lawyers are trying to do is preserve their wiggle room when they come to arguing in litigation. And they don't want to be pinned down by a document that says A, B, C, and D. That's material. And I think that clarity on materiality is more valuable than wiggle room in litigation.
Interesting.
And I've had the discussion several times.
I can tell. And this is, and I'm sort of watching the clock, and I'm going, no, look, I mean, I could easily go into this because I love this particular space. As you know, I'm deeply involved with the JORC code updates and regulation and so on. And I've thought about these concepts quite a bit, because you get stuck quite often between client regulators, your own integrity, and there is, as much as codes could say that it's clear, it's not always as clear as you want it to be, and people interpret things differently. And but so now I'll refrain from going deeper. I got one line left to quote you to see how you what your thoughts on that are, and then I think we should have another cup of coffee and get on with our day. And I'll just grab this here. So this is from a paper that's called Conditions for Intuitive Expertise. Like I said at the start, I've already mentioned this on the channel a few times, because the more I read by Daniel Kahneman, the more I'm thinking that there is something there for us as an industry. And I think I mentioned on a couple of talks that I had intended for him to come to the conference and speak to us about that, but that's unfortunately not longer possible. So all we can do is talk about the papers. Now, I'm not going to read the entire introduction here, but the last sentence is the interesting one for me. Subjective experience is not a reliable indicator of judgment accuracy, right? And that's a real outcome of the work that they're doing. And that's fascinating, right? Because, and I'm again paraphrasing a very complex, actually, I mean, it's not necessarily complex, but there's quite a lot in this. And there's different approaches, and even at their peak of their science field, people disagree, because the co-author is actually somebody who he has complete disagreements with, but they decided to write a paper together, which is also fascinating. Yeah. And we have that in our industry, right? As we found out at the conference, right? People at the top end are still conflicted on a number of things that really should be easy to resolve. But the point is that's not what you would expect, right? We all think that experience is everything. And the authors lay out very carefully that it's actually the opposite sometimes. It's that you have such a small framework of reference with the work that you do. You don't have a positive feedback loop that tells you, right? I mean, as I sort of have the example of the medical practitioner that does an operation on your heart. If they've done it 1,000 times, they know what that thing looks like. All our deposits look differently, all the data is differently, yada, yada. We don't really have that feedback loop. And we talked to Jackie Coombs the other day in the room, and she has this really nice philosophy of, if you haven't had your resources reconciled in a mind before, don't do resources, right? And that's pretty sobering, right? Because how many consultants have not actually seen their model build come out the other end, where they actually go, oh, actually, that wasn't quite what I had in mind, or quite what I thought. The point being that it's taken me a step back on what you actually in your email, when you initially suggested topics for this in terms of Dunning-Kruger and the imposter syndrome, it's taken me a step back, because I'm always thinking I don't know enough, and you're feeling that you're just fumbling around in the industry. And then here are a couple of dudes who clearly have done this subject matter justice, who say exactly what you kind of intuitively maybe felt if you look deep down in yourself, like, okay, you're an expert, right? You are an expert. But is there something still sitting there that provides truth to this claim that subjective experience is not a reliable indicator of judgment accuracy?
I'll answer that in a minute, but as you were talking there, I had another thought. It was about people who disagree getting together to jointly author something. And one of the best experiences I ever had with Harry Parker was when we were opposing experts on a piece of litigation. And Harry and I both have tremendous respect for each other, and we knew that something like 3/4 of the technical issues on this mineral project we actually agreed on. And so what I was the one who launched it. I asked my lawyers, can I have a meeting with Harry Parker, the expert on the other side, where there are no lawyers present, not his, not mine. We'll just sit in a room together, like you and I are sitting together right now, and we'll discuss the technical issues that we all, each one of us knows very well, because we've been experts on this project for a while. And we will just write a note to the judge that says, we agree on these things. And lawyers usually call those stipulations. And so we'll put together a set of stipulations where Harry and Mo will both say, we stipulate that the range of the variogram is 100 meters. We'll stipulate that the capping level should be X. And in the discussion that we have, there'll be moments when we just can't agree. And then that'll be missing from the set of stipulations, and it'll be something that has to come out in direct examination and cross-examination in court, so that the judge can weigh the different opinions and hopefully form his opinion about who's got the more convincing argument here. But putting that set of stipulations together between opposing experts, I love that exercise.
Yeah.
Harry and I got to sit together for an afternoon and talk about our views about this project, and on most things we agreed. And the judge really liked it too, because it short-circuited a whole lot of court time that was going to be wasted on eliciting opinions and cross-examining them, and
it's also setting a tone, probably, right? I mean,
and I think the judge appreciated that this former boss Harry and former minion Mo, these two guys are advanced enough in their careers now that they can actually try and be friends of the court. And in all of the Western jurisdictions, experts are supposed to remember that they're there to be friends of the court. They're not there to advocate with their lawyers. They're there to provide information to judges and juries. And so that moment when two warring parties got together and said, here's where we agree, I thought it was magical. It's like one of my favorite consulting moments. And on this thing, when you read that quote about subjective experience and accuracy of the judgment, what I thought about, what that triggered in me, was a thought about what we usually call the wisdom of the masses. And I've seen a number of studies on the wisdom of the masses, which generally take the form of a whole bunch of people being asked to estimate or predict something that's actually countable, but it's not easily countable, and so people are kind of stabbing around trying to get the right number, and the numbers are all over the map, by a order of magnitude. And then when, lo and behold, when you average them all, it comes really close. And with no collusion. It's just something magical about that, the wisdom of the masses. And so for a talk I gave decades ago in Calgary to a petroleum audience, I wanted to include that as a real life example. And I had a big jar, a big kitchen jar full of jelly beans. And I asked everyone in the audience at break to estimate the number of jelly beans in the jar. And at the end of the talk, we would average those results. And I knew how many there were because I'd put them all in. And I just wanted to see what kind of variation we got. And at break, I saw two guys who were both geostatisticians really studying the jar. And they were like trying to measure the circumference, with their hands and knowing what their span is, and so they got circumference and pi r 4/3 pi r cubed or whatever the volume of a cylinder is, and then they talked between themselves about the packing factor, like how tightly did jelly beans pack, like is it 50% porosity, or and so they really went to town on it. They had tremendous experience in this, and having done a lot of reservoir modeling, they knew kind of how you could answer this question by doing lots and lots of detailed calculations. Their two estimates were among the worst.
Right.
And the average of everyone else and them, the wisdom of the masses was remarkably close.
So, we had at the conference, there was a similar exercise, the IMS, International Mineral Standards. They had a jar with beans, and they asked everybody to do their best estimate. And they just put the results out on LinkedIn last week. And I think the average was down from the actual estimate, but the person who won was only 2 beans short, or some version of that. So that was interesting. But I think that philosophy has been debunked, but I can't quite remember why I think that. Because one of the problems that we have now, and I could drag in climate change here, and I know you have a shitload to say about that as well, but the wisdom of the masses, if there would be a true unbiased wisdom of the masses, maybe you would have an argument. But if you just add a sprinkle of social media these days, and I would say that wisdom of the masses is immediately dragged into absolute chaos. Maybe that held true 30 years ago before the internet, right? Because people had just a basic common sense about them, and they would approach this, still with some cognitive biases, but that would balance out. But the loudest voices at the moment, and that's perhaps part of the problem that I'm talking about here as well, right? Because even experts in our field, and I got onto this paper because of an exploration geologist who is doing follow-up work on this, and they have an even harder job because, and we talked about this with John Ronsky during the, and he pushed back on this a little bit, and I need to follow that up still, but as we talked about briefly at that point in time, the problem with having a framework of reference if you haven't actually found a deposit before, right? How can you truly be an expert in that space? Without diving too deep down into that again, I do, with the work we do as resource geologists, the subjective experience, a reliable indicator. If you're sitting there in a court as expert witness, it's always on my mind that even experts. And again, not to drag in a climate change thing, but perhaps because I'm such a disagreeable person by nature, right? My first thinking is, okay, I trust that you're an expert, but I'm still going to challenge you on that opinion. And I'm not quite sure if we do enough of that in our industry, or particularly in our field of work as resource geologists.
I would agree with you that statement is becoming stronger as social media becomes a stronger influence. I think subjective experience is becoming really siloed, and we all live in echo chambers and have our news feeds curated by Google and Apple, and we just get fed back things that are agreeable to us, and so I would agree that if that statement was ever true, it's even more true now, because subjective experience is becoming, if you could somehow measure every expert's subjective experience, you would see more diversity in those different subjective experiences. You would see more diversity now than you saw 30 or 40 years ago.
True.
And I think there are other environments in which subjective experience really gets twisted, and litigation might be one of them, where when you put someone on the stand and ask them about their expert opinion, there's a certain joy in the performance. It's a moment, and you see it in things like the O.J. Simpson trial, when that was he Korean, the doctor that testified on behalf of O.J.
Yeah.
Boy, he was a showman.
Yeah.
And he was good at what he did. He was entertaining. He had great analogies. And you could tell this was a performance piece.
Yeah.
And that has to affect you as a human being. Like when you're being an entertainer, when you're being a storyteller,
To believe your own stories. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I remember the first time I testified in front of a jury, and I had already been told by the lawyer I was working with which member of the jury he had seated because he was a technical person, because he was a civil engineer. And the lawyer on our side wanted one technical person on that jury of peers. And he told me he's sitting in position number 3. So when you talk, when you're giving your presentation, it was an environmental case, when you're giving your presentation, look at all the jury, but teach him.
Yeah.
Teach him. And he will teach the other jurors back in the jury room.
Yeah, right.
They'll listen to him. And so I remember realizing at the end of my presentation when I can't even remember how the analogy worked, but it involved, do you know who Hervé Villechaize is, the midget?
No.
He was the guy on Fantasy Island, the little guy on Fantasy Island that stood beside Mr. Rourke, Ricardo Montalban, and he would say, the plane. That was Hervé Villechaize. And back in the early 1990s, I knew this jury would recognize that. So for some reason, I can't quite remember the details of it, I asked them to imagine Hervé Villechaize pushing a push lawnmower. And of course, because he's a little person, he has a hard time pushing it because it's too high. The handles are too high.
Yeah.
And I realized at the end of my talk that this one guy that I was supposed to be speaking to make sure he understood, he was enjoying the talk, and he got the joke about the lawnmower being pushed by a little person. And I thought, well, that's entertainment, and I did my job. I got a message across, and so I give that as an example of me being an expert, but I'm not an unbiased expert. I'm a human being who's enjoying the moment and reveling in the fact that I'm doing well at this. And I think that also creates a disconnect between the accuracy of the judgment and the subjective experience, because the subjective personal experience involves human emotions.
Can't get away from it.
And so I would agree with that statement, and I would agree with yours that social media has made it worse.
Yeah. Well, maybe we've gone full circle, Mo. It's been awesome chatting to you, mate.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
That was really good fun.